Okay, I think we're going to get this started, lest I get in trouble with the organizer for getting us behind schedule right off the bat. So I want to thank you all for being here. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the 2024 Environmental Justice and Advocacy Symposium here at UC. My name is Bob Hyland. I'm an associate professor educator who's jointly appointed in the School of Environment and Sustainability here at UC, as well as the Department of English. And it is my honor and privilege to introduce to you in just a moment the director of the UC School of Environment and Sustainability, Dr. Laura Zanotti, who will provide opening remarks for this year's EJAS. So Dr. Zanotti is an environmental anthropologist who partners with indigenous peoples and local communities for just and sustainable futures. Her work has resulted in numerous published articles, an edited volume, several book chapters, and her NSF and Mellon Foundation funded book, The Kayapos Fight for Just Livelihoods. Please join me in welcoming SEA's director, Dr. Laura Zanotti.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Can you hear me okay in the back? Yeah, I'm getting some thumbs up. Thank you. Thanks for coming. I'd like to begin by honoring and recognizing that the University of Cincinnati has been built on the homeland of the indigenous Algonquin-speaking peoples, including but not limited to the Delaware, Miami, and Shawnee. The descendants of these nations continue to contribute to the cultural and social fabric of the greater Cincinnati area and Ohio more broadly. I'd also like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Bob Hyland. Thanks, Bob, for that generous introduction. Mark Osborne, who you probably saw at the beginning and gave you some cool swag, maybe. Rena Williams, who's our divisional dean, Dean James Mack, Kristen Rice, who's our financial officer, the Taft Research Institute Conference Series, and all those who in ANS have made this event possible, including you who are here today. As Bob mentioned, my name is Laura Zanotti, and I'm the new director. I'm finishing my first semester here at UC, so I'm real excited, of the School of Environment and Sustainability, otherwise known as SEAS, as Bob mentioned. And I say, you know, for those that don't know our acronym, Sailing the High Seas is a good way of thinking about it. It's home to the Environmental Studies BS and BA, and we're currently proud, for those who don't know, we're in the top 10 majors in the college, as well as minors in Environmental Studies and Environmental Analysis and Policy, and I see many of our students here in the audience. SEAS brings together expertise in the biological and physical sciences, social sciences, and humanities to create a transdisciplinary approach, and in layman's terms, that means what we need to critical thinking and to problem solving, and both in the classroom and in the community of the multiple crises we face today. And on crises, I'd like to read a little bit from Universities on Fire, Higher Education in the Climate Crisis. Don't worry, I'm not going to read a lot, so I won't bore you. I'll be quick. But he begins, Brian Alexander, in this book. We can start with a challenge. Climate change will literally reshape many institutions for the rest of the 21st century. The physical campus confronts the climate crisis unavoidably and obviously by the sheer fact of being embedded in the physical ecological world. Academic buildings and libraries, much like this one, lawns and streams, meals served and plants raised, cars and shuttles, researchers and students are subjected to storms, heat, water, sand, and the manifold other components of climate damage. Looking ahead, we may have to rethink nearly every aspect of each brick and mortar academic institution. I'll repeat that. Looking ahead, we may have to rethink nearly every aspect of each brick and mortar academic institution. At the same time, we should rethink the opposite, how campuses, as they presently exist, might contribute in a small way to either worsening or, what I like to think about more, addressing climate change. Because, of course, and the connection here to EJAS is, as environmental scholars and environmental justice scholars teach us, the roots that anchor us, the life stories that animate us, the relationships that drive us, what Kelly Corrigan calls everyday acts of bravery. These are the things of environmental justice, which is a care-based approach to healing the environment in our communities, where we uphold steadfast principles and actions, and which greats like Robert Bullard, Chico Mendes, and Wangari Maathai have taught us about protecting and loving the places we work, play, pray, and live. SEAS, we hope, in collaboration with other units on campus, and of course, you again, that that we believe we can nucleate and cultivate these spaces of change and, well, this rethinking too. Indeed, joining C's for me was about this. I've had a lot of questions since I got here. Why'd you come to Cincinnati after so much time elsewhere? But for me, for those who don't know me that well, it's inevitably entangled with my identity, as Bob mentioned, as an environmental anthropologist and social scientist whose multi-decade work has long fought alongside Indigenous peoples and local communities in the Amazon and beyond for biocultural diversity. But perhaps more importantly for this audience, these global fingerprints on my life are not as relevant as my personal biography and the multi-species relationships that have supported me over the course of my lifetime. I'm indebted, as perhaps many of you are, to the ecologically and justice-oriented communities I intersected with in my childhood as a young person growing up in the Cincinnati area, the legacy of Martha, the last passenger pigeon, the industrial polluted Ohio River, let me count thy ways, and the plentiful, and I asked how to pronounce this, Ordovician, yes, thank you. Fossils in creek beds animated my world while battling asthma. These experiences were encoded in me at an early age, alongside the chemical and more than human relationships that form diverse urban ecologies that you will hear about today, and all the phenomenal work that our alumni and students do. I've also learned as a young person about the racialized histories of the cityscape, with the history department's invited speaker, Mindy Thomason, full of this year described as root shock, the redlining realities of development, the inequities of access to green space, the vulnerabilities of flood-prone areas, the diverse foodways that were often not celebrated, and dominant narratives about the Queen City. As a collection, they invited me to critically explore privilege and power and ultimately adopt an EJ approach to examine the asymmetrical relationships that formulate landscapes and place, and to identify and confront systemic conditions. Indeed, there's much work to be done. As we all know, in the words of MacArthur genius Ruha Benjamin, who, thank you to Taft, also is coming in March of this year, this work is productive, meaning we, us, that's you and me and everyone else here, can engage in projects for just futures. So I want to conclude by saying C students and EVST alumni / new C's alumni in this midst, you are the ones that remind us, that inspire us, and that are leading us in diverse ways as you make it through your degree and or your lives. Your discoveries are just as important, in fact, more than ours. And I hope in some small way, this is one of our many co-creations together and will become part of your storied history. So cheers and welcome to EJAS.
One more time for Dr. Zanotti, please. Thank you, Dr. Zanotti. And now it is my honor to introduce Professor of Environmental Science in the UC School of Environment and Sustainability, Dr. Amy Townsend Small, who just told me 3 minutes ago that I could say that she's also my friend and colleague. Dr. Townsend Small, together with her students and collaborators, have published dozens of peer-reviewed articles. She has raised millions of dollars in research funding, as well as worked with local, national, and international governments on greenhouse gas emissions reductions policies based in science. She recently served in the Biden-Harris administration as the Senior Climate Advisor in the Bureau of Near East Affairs, Department of State. She is the recipient of the Science and Community Award from the Ohio Environmental Council and President's Volunteer Service Award from the President of the United States. Please help me welcome to the stage Dr. Amy Townsend Small.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm very excited to introduce our speakers today, many of whom I have a close personal relationship with. Our first speaker is Dr. Julianne Fernandez. She is an atmospheric methane researcher, currently serving as an airborne data scientist at Scientific Aviation, a division of ChampionX. She previously served as the chief scientist at NOAA's Atmospheric Research Observatory at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, kind of cool, during summer 2023. As a Marie Curie Fellow, she conducted her PhD research at the Royal Holloway University of London, focusing on identifying urban methane emission sources through high precision, stable isotopic measurements and mobile techniques. And her master's studies here at University of Cincinnati examined methane and nitrous oxide emissions from surface waters of Lake Erie, a eutrophic freshwater lake. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks, Amy. Oh, wait. Hi, I'm Julie. So I'm going to talk about some of the research I've done the past decade, which is about atmospheric methane emissions and the research. But yeah. So what is methane? It's a greenhouse gas. It's a hydrocarbon that has one carbon and 4 hydrogen. And it's a concern for today because it has direct impacts on climate warming. So even though it's less abundant than CO2 in the atmosphere, it's a lot more potent than CO2 at warming our atmosphere. And that's on a small time scale. So there's different sources of methane, and they're either natural from the earth, or they're also human induced. But some sources fall into these sectors. So like fossil fuels, there's oil, natural gas, and coal. There's waste sources like landfills, sewage, and compost. There's a lot of agricultural sources like ruminants and the animal waste that comes along with it. And then there's also wetlands and permafrost and environments of eutrophication that contribute to atmospheric methane emissions. So what's going on in the atmosphere? Basically, this is a graph from the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration. We see the methane on the y-axis and then time on the y in years. But it basically shows us that methane through time is increasing. And what we also see is that this increase is growing at a large rate. So what really is going on? So in the early 90s and 80s, when we started measuring, we kind of see this increase, and that's basically influenced by the Industrial Revolution and when we started using fossil fuels. And then there's this equilibration area where nothing's really happening. Then we see another rise starting in 2006. And then around 2014, we see an increase in this rise. And then there's another increase that starts around 2020, but this rate that it's growing hasn't even been seen in the 20th century effect. So a lot of scientists are trying to understand all these changes and how we impact it. So one way is to measure different things of methane to better understand this problem. So measuring source tracers of methane, and that's basically measuring a tracer, which tells us more information about the methane emission. So for example, you can measure the carbon composition of methane, and specifically like carbon 13 to 12. But if we look at an area where the cleanest air on Earth is, where it's the most circulated in the world, we could see here, this is a similar graph with methane concentration and time, but we basically see the same that we saw in the other graph I showed you. But at this specific research station, we collect flasks that gets filled with air, and then we send those samples to another lab, and they actually analyze for this source tracer of methane. So we could look at that data that comes from these flasks and kind of compare it to the trends that we saw earlier. And we basically see that the rise in methane correlates to this change in the isotopic values of carbon 13 and methane. So carbon 13 here is going more negative, so it's a slope. But if we look at what this tells us, the tracer will tell us how, like, what the sources are of methane, because these signatures change depending on how the methane is produced. So we have a huge influence in the earlier days with fossil fuels, which is the signatures that we see on the top, this bottom graph, and it slopes down because the main contributions of methane may be changing or shifting to a different source of methane, which some scientists think it's more wetlands or more microbial sources like landfills and our waste. So this is actually driving more science to understand why this change is happening. So everyone's trying to like measure more sources. So there's a lot of different ways to measure sources, mainly like from the ground or from the air. And then, so one way is mobile techniques. You basically have a vehicle and you rig it up with instruments that measure methane continuously. And you can drive around an entire city like a crazy person and measure all the methane, map it out. And then you see these different hot spots where it's yellow and the driving track of a survey that we've done. And you can see that you can target different areas where methane is leaking. So this is a zoom in, and you can actually locate where the methane is coming from in an urban city. So you can estimate here where it's high in the yellow and come up with an emission rate. And we actually collected a sample and we determined that it's from natural gas and not from the sewage system. And this information is valuable because you can not only use it for research, but if you collaborate with cities and natural gas distribution companies, they can actually use this information to target and reduce their methane emissions. So the other way that I've measured is these airborne measurements. Basically the same as rigging up the car with instruments that measure methane. We rig up this little plane. Then we fly around different sources of methane. And this type of measurement is good for like large scale sources like a giant landfill that you can't just measure with a car, or large facilities like petroleum, coal, and sewage treatment plants. So basically we fly in a circle and we change in altitude. So we get a measurement as in a cylindrical pattern. And this allows us to detect where the methane plume is, and that those measurements can be then integrated to calculate an emission rate. And a lot of people use this information, like a lot of companies have to report their emissions, like a landfill has to report their emissions to EPA and so on with other large facilities. And even researchers will ask for types of data like this if they need measurements. But to do all this field work, UC actually helped me a lot. Like working with Amy Townsend Small, I got an immense amount of field work, probably a normal amount of field work for a grad student. Like I worked at sea, I worked on oil and gas, I worked in urban stuff, and that's because I had my own research project and I helped and got to do contributions to other people's projects with her lab. But I basically learned like really good ways for field planning, collecting really good data and samples, but I also got experience in her lab. And that's where I actually got introduced to isotopes. At first I was like, oh my God, I don't even know what an isotope is, but then you learn. And then I learned like gas chromatograph, and like working in the lab, you learn skills like, troubleshooting an instrument because nothing really goes well, like smoothly in the lab, but I learned a lot from that. But then I also learned that you have to communicate your science and your research with people. Otherwise, it's like kind of useless if you just keep it all in. And so I attended like a lot of conferences. Like, I don't know, I feel like I did more conferences during my master's than my PhD, but it was all regional, national, and international. And then what came out of it, thanks to Amy, was my first publication. But you guys asked, like, how could we do the climate thing or solve it? I'm not really sure, but if we could solve like what is happening with methane, solving and understanding what the sources and sinks are doing in the atmosphere, then we'll get a clear vision of like our societal impacts on climate warming. And then that will allow us to optimize and prioritize our mitigation and adaptation plans for the future. So thank you.
Really, actually, that picture, one of those pictures reminded me, she actually not only has worked at the South Pole, she also worked at the bottom of the ocean. She dove in Alvin, the remotely operated vehicle. Is it human operated? Yeah, anyway, ask her about that later. Pretty amazing. Okay, our next speaker is Mackenzie Mason. She's a graduate of the Environmental Studies program at University of Cincinnati. She currently works as a community organizer for the Do Good Foundation, supporting a campaign to end the highway expansion of the Brent Spence Bridge corridor. Woo! Through her work, Mackenzie engages the community in ways ranging from personal conversations to large public meetings, all in an effort to find a better solution to the highway project that will improve air quality, reduce noise pollution, and improve safety for communities. Mackenzie was previously the president of UC Students for Burnett Woods and currently sits on the Preserve Burnett Woods Board of Directors. Welcome.
Thank you, everyone. So again, my name is Mackenzie Mason, and I work as a community organizer on a campaign to end the highway expansion of I-75 or the Brent Spence Bridge corridor. Start out, environmental advocacy is inherently a human pursuit. Issues not only with human health, but socioeconomic factors, displacement, access to food and shelter, and mental well-being, all are connected to the environments we live in, whether they're built or natural. And the justice and the environment are interlinked with one another, as I came to learn here at my time at UC, and as I continue to learn in my role as a community organizer. I graduated from UC this past April, and I took with it experiences of leadership and advocacy. While a student, I had the pleasure to work with community throughout my club involvements, like UC Students for Burnett Woods, where I got to advocate for the protection of green space in the urban core, and through my service learning classes when I got to work alongside residents of Middletown, Ohio and Latonia, Kentucky. Interacting with the community, researching health disparities, and dealing with unjust systems with lack of adequate public involvement empowered me to fight for what I'm fighting for today. Being in my generation, I grew up under the threat of climate change and have been hyper aware about environmental issues ever since my childhood. But I don't think it was until I started becoming more educated on the issues through the classroom and especially through real world experiences that I felt empowered to do anything about it. Learning about the disproportionate effects that environmental consequences have on minority and low income neighborhoods has deeply saddened me, but it has also taught me to use my own agency and do something about it. When I first learned about the highway expansion in February. So most of us here today are probably somewhat familiar with the Brent Spence Bridge corridor that connects northern Kentucky to southern Ohio. The bridge relatively recently received billions of dollars of federal investment to be fixed. Now, I had been under the assumption that this was going to be a bridge replacement project to fix the bridge, but it's not. Instead, the Federal Highway Administration, along with the Ohio Department of Transportation and Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, are planning an 8-mile-long massive highway expansion stretching between the two states. 8 miles long, expanding some areas from 10 lanes to about 20 lanes, and a companion bridge that will practically double the size of the physical footprint of the bridge existing today. My attention was instantly drawn towards the dramatic size and space of this project. It made me angry. What was the point of doing that? Why wouldn't expansion cause more harm than good? Science already tells us that cars are a huge problem when it comes to environment. In fact, the EPA reported that transportation is our largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the US at 28%, and that number is still increasing. Even in Cincinnati, we've acknowledged in our own Green Cincinnati plan that transportation has generated 33% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the region. Methane, nitrous oxide, finite particulate matter, ozone are all from exhaust, the brakes, and the tires of those who pass through our cities. Science also tells us there's a correlation between highway proximity and health. The Biden administration's Justice 40 initiative maps show us that those who live closer to the interstate experience higher rates of asthma due to higher exposure to diesel particulate matter and traffic proximity and volume. Health problems, including asthma, but also emphysema, COPD, and decreased lung function are all more likely if you live near an interstate. And on top of this, even a study conducted by the Cincinnati Children's Hospital in 2020 proves the health effects of interstates are detrimental, finding that exposure to traffic-related air pollution can actually reduce a child's gray matter in their brains, which control their motor control functions. Upon learning more about this project, though, I became better informed on the history of Cincinnati's infamous interstate, the interstate that tore through neighborhoods in Covington and Cincinnati when it was built in the 1950s. In Cincinnati, the West End neighborhood in particular faced the most destruction because of the highway. Prior to 1950, the West End was a thriving and vibrant culture with a strong sense of community. The neighborhood was home to a mix of working class families and small businesses, many of which were owned by African Americans. The West End was also home to many historic sites, including churches, schools, and theaters. But when I-75 came through, over 25,000 people were displaced, being told at their doorsteps that they needed to move. Over time, the process of urban renewal took over, and residents in the West End lost valuable connections to resources, jobs, grocery stores, affordable transportation and housing, health resources. And to top this off, the community is also at the forefront of the day-to-day noise and pollution, both from idling and speeding traffic from the interstate. The historical implications of this highway expansion has made residents feel more than just excluded, but they feel taken advantage of. I think one resident who grew up when the highway was first coming through articulates it best. They see the West End as valuable, but not the people. These transportation agencies are doing this in the name of reducing traffic, but highway expansion has never worked. Expanding the highway would encourage drivers to take more trips on the interstate that they normally would have combined or not taken, leading to more urban sprawl and more traffic. When thinking about ways to relieve congestion, resolve health issues and pollution issues, and restoring community, we need a much more creative solution than adding lanes, which is why our coalition has recently launched or relaunched the People Over Pavement movement, a freeway fighting movement that believes that there is a more just way to restore the harms of the interstate. Instead of pouring more money into more lanes, we think that traffic should be mitigated by smartly investing in a comprehensive transportation system and community connectivity for our region. So that can include light rail and commuter rail, frequent and reliable bus services, safe bike and pedestrian infrastructure. And since only about 15% of the traffic on I-75 is metro through traffic, giving local residents transit options would enable the city to more effectively use the freed up space for a higher purpose, such as housing. This movement was inspired by a network across the country called the Freeway Fighters. Cities like Houston, Minneapolis, Austin, and Portland are a part of this movement against the existing highways that have torn apart their cities, and they advocate for better alternatives. Traditionally, the engagement strategy when it comes to new development comes in as an afterthought. It's a box for agencies to check off to say that they consult a community. Now that I'm working on the ground with residents, it's apparent that this community engagement has been inadequate at best. Agencies typically work from the top down, proposing an idea spent months or years being worked on and approved. And by the time that it reaches the public, the decision to keep their base design is practically made. In our advocacy, we're using a bottom-up approach. So far, we've held public meetings with concerned residents, visited and canvassed neighborhoods, and held one-on-one conversations to better understand neighborhood experiences and wants. We've started doing block walks with neighborhood groups to identify important infrastructure issues and valued community spaces, and have also begun a video testimony project to amplify neighbors' concerns with the project. Our goal is to change the outcome. And to do this, we've taken all of this feedback from the conversations we've been holding the past few months and create a rendering of what could be in place of I-75, a transit boulevard that focuses on reconnecting residents to lost resources and creating accessible transportation routes that are currently plagued with car-centric infrastructure. In the spring, we aim to bring residents together at community listening sessions to use their feedback for final designs to propose a community-oriented solution. Our coalition has also taken legal routes in attempts to stop the expansion. One was a Title VI complaint filed against the FHWA outlining civil rights and environmental justice concerns. And the other was a NEPA lawsuit that was recently filed against ODOT, KYTC, and the FHWA, and multiple others that seeks a full environmental impact statement on the project as they're operating on a supplemental environmental state assessment from 2012. Environmental justice has shown me the complexities of environmental advocacy and how systemically rooted it is. Highway expansion is one expression of environmental justice, and you can help fight it. We have volunteers and staff here tonight who will be passing out push cards and more information about the People Over Pavement movement. We can work together across the region to bring transportation justice and reduce greenhouse gas emissions for a better and more equitable future. Join us and help us reimagine what we are leaving for the people of Cincinnati in the next 50 to 100 years. Thank you, and I look forward to speaking with you all at the reception and at one of our upcoming events. Thank you.
That was awesome. Great job. Okay. Our next speaker is Dr. Rob Gioeli. He's an associate professor of environmental humanities and history at the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, Sweden, where he also directs the KTH Environmental Humanities Laboratory. His research and teaching focus on urban environmental history, particularly the intersections of race, sustainability, and environmental justice. A native Cincinnatian, he was professor of history at UC Blue Ash College for more than 10 years, and he received his PhD at UC in 2008. Welcome, Rob.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk today about why American suburbia is killing the planet, or why the electric car probably isn't going to stay. This research comes from a larger project I've been working on for almost a decade to try to understand both continued racial segregation in American cities, but also climate change. And it comes from the reality that still to this day, American suburbs alone count for the total US household carbon footprint. And this is a map that shows us suburban St. Louis and exurban areas like O'Fallon, Missouri, right, have tremendously high carbon footprint. Over the past decade, a lot of our discussion has focused on how do we make these suburban areas more climate friendly. Most of our efforts, though, have focused on the electric car, removing gasoline and replacing it with electrification, electric car, truck, van, and SUV. But I would argue that this doesn't really solve the long-term nature of the problem. This is what we would call a techno fix. It's just replacing one resource-intensive technology with another resource-intensive technology and system. In this larger project, I argue that what we need to focus on is the single-family home within suburban development, thinking it as a primary site of energy and resource-intensive consumption that's also wrapped up with a racialized and gendered social system. To help us think through the single-family home, I like to use this image of a prefabricated single-family home from the Lincoln Homes Corporation, which built these style of homes in Western Pennsylvania and put them all over the Midwest in the 50s and 60s. And if we take apart the pieces of this home, we can begin to think of it as an energy-intensive social system. Look at the garage, which is, of course, connected garage is new to a lot of homes in the 1950s and 60s. And now we have homes where the garage is the center of the house in many ways. And this tells us what the automobile is and how important it is to suburban transit and mobility. It's not just about the garage or the car, it's about how neighborhoods are developed. Neighborhoods in most American suburbs are what historian Chris Wells calls car country, a particular style of design and development where you have residential streets have one connection to the arterial road. You have lots of dead ends and cul-de-sacs. You have what we call single-use zoning, where schools and shops and houses are all separate requires you to get to them via an automobile. It's a community designed solely for efficient automobile movement. You could have public transit here, but the nature of the design makes it very inefficient. And as we know, it's often opposed at every step by many community members. We look at the design of the house itself. It's built for a particular style of family, right? The heteronormative nuclear family. We have spaces of leisure and labor. Labor for women in the kitchen, leisure for men in a den or garage. We have a particular family system that we can see enshrined with privacy in bedroom. Another part of this social environmental system is the yard itself, right? Yards and lawns become popular with American suburbs copy British estates in the 19th century, and we still think the lawn is very important today, but it privatizes recreation and leisure space instead of using a public park, and it requires constant inputs of pesticides and herbicides and water, and it creates these new energy and resource intensive ecologies. Of course, another key part of this that we don't talk about is how this is actually significantly government subsidized, beginning in the 1940s and all the way up through today, right? Directly and indirectly, the federal government, through various schemes, subsidizes and undergirds the construction of suburbs. It's a social housing scheme, a public housing scheme, but in a different way for different groups of people. It is, especially in the 50s and 60s, a racialized property market, right? This is a famous redlining map from Cleveland. We need to think about how government subsidies for new single-family home construction are primarily available for folks in the suburbs, and particularly for suburban whites. Most of the money goes to the suburban areas in the 50s and 60s. If you live in a majority Black neighborhood, it's almost impossible to get a mortgage. And it's really impossible for Black families to get a mortgage in almost any neighborhood. This means that property markets become racialized, right? Your race, particularly whiteness, creates value and builds wealth for an individual homeowner. This becomes tremendously powerful because oftentimes maintaining that wealth means protecting the whiteness of the community. They are part and parcel. I talk about all these things together to understand them as a land, resource, energy intensive, social, environmental system, all embedded within that single family home. But it's an unstable system, right? It's constantly moving and being challenged, particularly in the 60s, when African American communities and civil rights activists say, we want access to that system. We want you to remove redlining and open up suburban development. And this is partially successful with the passage of the Fair Housing Act of 1968, but whites and suburban communities don't give up easily. So how do you remake white privilege and power in the suburbs after the civil rights movement? Well, you control metropolitan space. Other levers like restricting access to education or on the job are less available because of civil rights acts and the courts and the success of those, but you can control land use. And metropolitan development policy in the United States is very decentralized, right? You have all these, in Cincinnati and many cities, we have villages and cities and townships, right? The control of the zoning and everything about it. So local people have a tremendous amount of power. What are two of the main things they do to maintain that metropolitan power? First, they look to control housing. After the 1960s, you have what I call the second urban or metropolitan segregation regime. None of these laws are specifically racial on their face, but they have the same impact. Zoning and development restrictions that say you have to build a house on a minimum 1 acre lot, or it has to be a particular style of home, restricts development. Open space requirements. We all have parks and open space, but this also restricts development. Opposition to any sort of multifamily home or putting that multifamily home or that social or public housing only in particular areas. This privileges a particular style of community and also a racially privileged style of community. The other thing you try to do is control mobility, to control access by folks from the city, and especially African Americans, right? You want to reinforce the automobile intensiveness. I've studied particularly Atlanta in this context, and beginning in the 1960s all the way up until today, many Atlanta suburbs oppose the extension of MARTA, the Atlanta transit system, because of a racialized fear. And we see this all over the United States. See it in Cincinnati about 20 years ago when the city looked to expand its public transportation system. So why do we do this? Why do we continue to try to reinforce this system? Well, for many Americans, it's say they have to protect their housing value, right? They want to protect their housing value because they have so much wealth invested in that house, right? It's our primary form of Social Security in the United States, is owning that home. They, of course, related to this, they also say they want to maintain a good school district, preserve the character of the community, and keep out crime. These are the arguments that people, right? But this is how embedded they are within this social system. So how do we disconnect ourselves from this? What are the ways that we can think about solutions to build more just and equitable and sustainable cities? For me, the most important thing is housing. We need social housing. This is an umbrella term that includes public housing and other types of housing built for social benefit, to provide access to people. Too much of your stability and security in American life is wrapped up in owning a home in the right neighborhood. Social housing should be for everyone, right? The broad middle class should have access to various types of subsidized housing, not just the poor. And we know from other countries that when you have this, it removes the stigma of public housing, it improves neighborhood diversity and security, and removes that relentless drive to own a single family home. There's so much positive impact from this particular type of policy choice. We need equitable school funding, so the quality of your school isn't dependent upon the neighborhood that you live in. High gas taxes to fund significant public transit development in every community and also discourage petrol driving. We need more and better density in particular neighborhoods. Some neighborhoods have good density, but it's still very auto-centric. In general, we need to retrofit our existing suburbs with lots of different infill development, bikeways, public transit, and lots of other things that good planners know we can do, but we have to require it. And finally, and this is even more big picture, we need to begin to imagine a world where the majority of people don't need or own a car. A car should be for the minority of folks who need it. And most of us need to get around on a daily basis, like walking, biking, or with public transit.
That was really cool. Okay, our next speaker is Amy Kesterman. Great name. Amy is a permit area supervisor in the Permits, Inspections, and Compliance section of the Southwest Ohio Air Quality Agency, a division of the Hamilton County Department of Environmental Services, and the local air agency for Ohio EPA. Ms. Kesterman has been with the agency since 2006, serving as an environmental compliance specialist and then as the permit area supervisor. Ms. Kesterman's work involves permitting, inspection, compliance determination, and enforcement of state and federal regulations as it pertains to industrial sources of air pollution. Welcome, Amy.
You, Amy. It's good to be here. Thank you for having this. Yes, I graduated from UC in 2001, and I'm currently working at Hamilton County Department of Environmental Services. We're just down the road from here on Taft. Part of that department is we have a recycling side, and then we have the air quality side. And so I work for the air quality side, which is the Southwest Ohio Air Quality Agency. We're a local air agency, and we do the work for Ohio EPA for 5 counties here. So we have Hamilton, Butler, Claremont, Warren, and Clinton counties. Okay, yep. So a lot of what I was going to say, she already said. Okay, so the work that we're doing on a daily basis is evaluating the quantity of criteria air pollutants like ozone, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and lead, hazardous air pollutants like xylene and styrene, greenhouse gases like methane and carbon dioxide,
We then determine which rules apply to the industrial sources and create permit documents that include emission limitations, requirements for control devices, monitoring, record keeping, reporting, and testing if applicable. So we only do industrial sources of air pollution. We don't do mobile sources. We don't do vehicles. We don't do inside your house. We don't do inside the facilities. We only do outside the facilities. So the emissions that are getting to the ambient air where it can impact human health and the environment. Our goal is to have ambient air quality at a level that is protective of human health and the environment. The way this works is the Clean Air Act requires the federal EPA to set national ambient air quality standards. And those national ambient air quality standards are for the 6 criteria air pollutants. Then the states are required to create a plan to make sure that the state is in compliance or in attainment with those standards. Part of that is creating rules to make sure that we can try to keep our ambient air quality in a good place. The states are also required to have a permitting program, so that's where we come in. So the permit document itself serves as a tool that we can give to industry. So industry knows how to make their product. They're, focused on manufacturing, and we know all of the rules, and there are a lot of rules. And so my job and the job of our agency is to pick and choose the specific rules that apply to each piece of equipment inside of a facility. And then we put those rules into a permit document, lined out really nicely, so that the facility knows which rules apply to them, what they have to do to comply, what records they have to keep, reporting, and all the testing. So that's what we put into our permits. And then in turn, we take those permit documents and we go out and inspect the facilities and make sure they're following them. We can also, if we find that there are any violations, then we can take enforcement. And all of this is done at a local level. So we are contracted specific. So there's a history. I'm going to talk too much. That's why I brought this. So I didn't talk too much, but anyhow. Okay, so there's a history of some agencies in Ohio predating the Clean Air Act. And in Cincinnati, we have one of the oldest air quality offices. Historically, it was called the Office of the Smoke Inspector. And so that was when there was a lot of coal burning in homes and everywhere, and there was a lot of coal. So there was this office historically in Cincinnati. And there are these small little offices that were already here in Ohio, throughout Ohio. And that is what has become we are called this local air agency. So we have a smaller area, but if we weren't here, there would be a district office doing the exact same work that I do. And we are the work of the district office. And so we contract with Ohio EPA, but also with US EPA. So we regulate all of the rules for our 5-county area here. All right. So where was I? The permit document then serves a tool. And so then what we're looking for is attainment, right, with our ambient air quality. And so I'll say too, so I'm only on the permitting and compliance inspection half of our air quality agency. There's also the monitoring and analysis half, and they have the monitors all around. And they are the ones monitoring our ambient air here for all of our 5 counties. But so I'm just going to mostly talk about my side though. But the areas that are in attainment, of course, still have regulations because we don't want the air quality to get worse. We don't want it to degrade. We want to keep it where it is. And so that would be called in attainment. And then when an area is in non-attainment or we're not meeting that standard, then the state is required to take action. They have to come up with a plan to come into compliance. And then that usually involves more restrictive regulation or different programs that we have to put in place. So I don't know if any of you even remember, there was the, the vehicle emission, what's it called? E-check. And so we used to have E-check here, and I believe it still exists in the Cleveland area. And so, so ECHEC was part of this when we had a non-attainment area here, okay? We have since moved out of non-attainment, and so that got to go away for a little bit. We'll see if it ever comes back. So our local airshed is currently in attainment with all of the NACs. So good for us. Yes, good job. However, we just barely made it for ozone. Just barely. So in 2022, we were redesignated. We actually were initially designated non-attainment, but then we had like a little bit more time while they were like figuring everything out, and we could put in a whole nother year of information, and we got to be redesignated as attainment, but just barely. So we were thinking, yay, this is great. We're not going to have to change any of our rules, but just kidding. Ohio decided that we are so close that we didn't want to degrade our air quality anymore. We wanted to stay in attainment. So they went ahead with the plan of further regulation for our area. And what that means is, so in our jurisdiction, we have 5 counties, but the air sheds are designated a little bit differently. And so only 4 counties are received these new rules. So Clinton County is kind of in our jurisdiction, but off by itself. It was fine. It's still fine. But Butler, Claremont, Warren, and Hamilton counties received some new rules in 2022. And it was pretty significant. 14 new VOC rules. So let me back up a little bit. So ozone is a secondary pollutant. So that is what the National Ambient Air Quality Standard is written for ozone, ground level ozone. But when we are regulating industry and the emissions that are coming out of the stacks, we're not giving them a rule for ozone. We're giving them a rule for VOCs, volatile organic compounds, and NOx, because those 2 pollutants combined in the presence of sunlight creates ground level ozone. So we have 14 new rules for VOC and additional rules for NOx as well. But this has affected hundreds of our facilities. And we were locally, so that happened at the state level. We kind of knew they were talking about rules, but we really thought that when redesignation happened, that would kind of be sidelined. And so a month after they became effective, they decided to have a meeting with us. And so in our local agency about implementing these rules. So we're all talking about it. It has taken, for the past 2 years, we've been working very hard because we have to orient ourselves with the new rules. We also are contacting all of our facilities and educating our facilities on the new rules, because guess what? They don't keep up on that. So we are the ones that have to bring that to them, obviously. We are rewriting their permits to include new regulations, and then collaborating with some facilities who are needing to create plans to come into compliance with these rules still. So this is an ongoing process, and it will be, I'm sure, for a few more years. The NACs are required to be reevaluated every 5 years. During these reevaluations, the federal EPA looks at health and environmental data to determine whether the NACs are protective enough or might possibly need to be lowered. In 2024, the NACs for particulate matter 2.5 microns and less in diameter was decided that it needed to be lowered. It was lowered from 12 micrograms per cubic meter to 9 micrograms per cubic meter. That's a huge jump. That's huge. Needed to be protective for human health and the environment. So we are, again, based on our current data, looking like our airshed will not be in attainment with that 9 microgram per cubic meter standard. So we are starting work groups this time. Great. So we're going to work and so that we have a plan moving forward for working with our industrial community here, because we are anticipating that there will be some change. Not sure what that will be yet, but we will be working on that. This has been and will be challenging work. But for us, this is where the changes are made, which will benefit human health and the environment. Our work of educating our industrial community and working together to bring everyone into compliance with permit requirements and regulations is what will make beneficial changes to our ambient air quality. For my work, change comes through regulation, education, and implementation. I've been talking about the NACs, but the NACs are only for 6 criteria air pollutants. When I go and speak at environmental classes and I ask people, what are the 6 criteria air pollutants? Almost always, the answer includes methane and carbon dioxide. They are not criteria air pollutants. So those are the, we don't have a national ambient air quality standard for those pollutants. And so you can see the process that I work with daily goes back to those standards. Without a process of reevaluating the NACs every 5 years and looking at this and creating the rules, this is what prompts us to create the rules. This is not happening for these pollutants that are warming our climate. And we do have rules. Okay, so we do have rules for methane and we do have rules for greenhouse gases. However, they are mostly geared toward major sources of air pollution or only specific industry like oil and gas or the power production. Sometimes it is now starting to be in the manufacturing piece, so manufacturing of the vehicles, so we're doing it that way. But for the work that I do on a daily basis, the majority of my permits that are for all of the different pieces of industry, it does not require me to evaluate carbon dioxide. I have done it before, but it has been years ago. And so this is something that can be improved upon. So for me, when I look forward to what comes next, specifically for making reductions in carbon dioxide and methane in my line of work, the change will most likely come through further regulation, education, and implementation. That will mean advocating for these regulatory changes at the legislative level, because we are just a regulatory agency. We can only uphold the rules and regulations that are established in code. But once effective, we are always ready to take on the challenge to educate our community and implement new regulations for the benefit of health and the environment, and we look forward to that. Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Jake Deighton. Jake is an environmental safety specialist with a drive to advance environmental and public health. An alum of the University of Cincinnati's Environmental Studies program, Jake has cultivated extensive experience in the environmental sector, holding positions at Ohio EPA, the Cincinnati Health Department, and the Metropolitan Sewer District of Greater Cincinnati. As a registered environmental health specialist with an OSHA 40-hour HAZWOPER certification, Jake possesses a comprehensive understanding of environmental regulations and compliance. He earned a master's degree in geology from University of Cincinnati, where he developed expertise in air pollution and later developed expertise in solid and CD&D waste management in the governmental sector of the environmental field. Currently, Jake specializes in the pretreatment of industrial wastewater and the research of PFAS in the local wastewater collection system with the goal of addressing critical challenges in environmental and public health. Welcome, Jake.
Hello, everyone. What's up? Got a full house today. Nice. As Amy introduced me, I'm Jake. I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about my career path and some of the projects I worked on. So let's get this started here. So I broke my presentation up into a few different sections. I'm going to talk about myself a little bit more, and then I'm going to talk about the scope of my work, some research I've worked on, some obstacles, some roadblocks, my education, some successes I've observed, and how I think things are going to go in the future. Who's Jake? I'm Jake. I'm a graduate of the University of Cincinnati's College of Arts and Sciences. You're good, man. I had the opportunity to begin working in the environmental field as an undergraduate at US EPA. After that, I worked as a TA and research assistant at the University of Cincinnati, working with Dr. Townsend Small. After I graduated, I moved up to Columbus and worked at Ohio EPA in the Division of Air Pollution Control. And then I moved back down here because I worked for the Cincinnati Health Department. And now I work for the Metropolitan Sewer District. So I've been around the block a few times. There we go. So I've broken my work experience so far into 3 major categories. The first was air pollution, studying the impacts of oil and gas operations in the Appalachian Basin. And I compiled a statewide emissions inventory for the state of Ohio with Ohio EPA. I've also worked in waste management. I've addressed open dumping complaints. I evaluated large quantity generators of infectious waste, of solid waste, and construction, demolition, and debris violators. After that, I moved on to wastewater. I'm currently studying the local inputs of PFAS into the wastewater collection system, and MSD regulates a wide variety of industrial users throughout the greater Cincinnati area. So I'll talk to you about my first project. It was measuring the greenhouse gases and hazardous air pollutants from oil and gas wells. You remember this one? So this was an interesting case specifically. It was a well that had been operational since approximately the 90s-ish, but a tree fell on the wellhead and it was venting 100% of the natural gas it was producing straight to the atmosphere. This, I'd like to say, was a rare occasion, but most of the time when we were measuring wells, they were leaking because of neglect. We found a disproportionate amount of damaged wells. However, something that's kind of hopeful from this study was a small amount of these wells accounted for a majority of the pollutants. Therefore, we can kind of target, hopefully, the bad actors. Technical difficulties. So the next thing I worked on after graduation was compiling the state's emissions inventory for the year 2018. We took reported emissions of the criteria pollutants from industrial sources like AMI regulates, and we would submit this data to US EPA. In addition to the emissions inventory, I also performed a QA/QC on the state's 2017 National Emissions Inventory, which is a triennial report of all air pollutant sources, including mobile sources, non-point sources, we call them area sources, and mobile sources. So I made sure all of our data was square before we sent it off to US EPA to compile this large report. Sorry. The next most challenging project I worked on was the cleanup of this site here. This was a construction demolition debris processor / recycler. Unfortunately, at this site, they were bringing in waste, commingled waste, faster than they could separate it and send it to their end market. The aerial photography really gives a good scope of what happened here. This was on site, inspection number 1, ground zero. This site ranged from, general construction demolition debris like concrete, all the way to things like scrap steel, scrap metals, insulation, drywall, you name it, it was there. If it built a building, it was on this site. This took me about 2 years to clean up. The pictures really speak for themselves, honestly. But after about 1.5 years, 2 years, we got them cleaned up. The difference was really night and day. Yes. I did this work with the Cincinnati Health Department. We led the enforcement effort on this. So this was my last inspection there, and I'm hoping it still looks like this today. And I'm pretty sure that it is, because part of this cleanup effort was to get this facility permitted as a recycling facility, as a processor of construction demolition debris. So right now, if the permitting process has gone to plan, they're going to get a quarterly inspection to make sure they're running this facility in compliance with the state regulations. And ultimately, if they keep it clean, it's a great service for our area to have. Currently, I'm working on the industrial pretreatment of wastewater, more on the regulatory compliance end of things. So like Amy, we have a multitude of industrial users that discharge to our collection system. We issue them a permit, we conduct inspections, we make sure that they're within their permit limits, and we issue any necessary enforcement. Along with that, I'm our working group's lead on PFAS research in the local wastewater collection system. So we're studying where it's coming from and how it's moving through our system. We did a study earlier this year on residential wastewater. We sampled from septic systems and from pump stations that gather wastewater specifically from residential areas. We're currently working on a wet weather project where we're sampling PFAS from combined sewer overflows and high rate treatment facilities that come online during a wet weather event to mitigate the impacts of CSOs on surface water. Some obstacles I encountered. When you're out doing field work and you're doing enforcement on the general public, it's hard to gain people's trust. So you got to be cool with it. Another obstacle I've encountered is the quantity of work. We constantly, especially at the health department, we got complaints every single day about all kinds of stuff, from people throwing tires out in their backyard to junk cars to large scale violators, if you will. So we got a lot of work to do, and we're continuously finding more work to do. And occasionally you find yourself in a mud pit. Yeah, it was. Some roadblocks I've encountered are your powers and authorities, as I'm sure Amy has encountered. Sometimes you're on site and you see something that you know is wrong, but you don't quite have the authority to do anything about it. The good thing is we can also bounce things between different agencies. So I'm hopeful that interagency collaboration continues to grow and hopefully get better. The legislative process, the gears of justice move slow, right? So sometimes we see a problem, we measure a problem, we know it exists, we know its impact, but getting our regulations square and agreed upon is difficult. It's hard to get things going. That also limits your powers and authorities. Additionally, sometimes politics get in the way. I've witnessed this at federal, state, and local level. And funding can be hard to come by too. So this all kind of began with my education here at UC. I started here in 2014 as an undergraduate student. I earned an environmental science bachelor's or environmental studies bachelor's. Some of the things that I gleaned from my undergraduate work that have helped me throughout my career was my coursework. Primarily, it provided a fundamental understanding of these issues, and I learned about methods to reduce or resolve these issues. I also got to be involved in several different internships, one being US EPA, the next being MSD. This gave me hands-on experience, both in a laboratory environment and out in the field. And then also networking. I met people in my undergraduate world that I still connect with. I have great mentors like Amy that I still keep in touch with. I'm having a hard time with this clicker. Clickers, roadblocks. After I finished up my bachelor's degree, I continued working on my coursework and earned a master's in geology. My project, working on oil and gas emissions, allowed me to do a lot of field work. I got to be out in nature, seeing some ugly things and some beautiful things. Another thing is I got to go to conferences. This allowed me to practice presenting, talking to other researchers, talking to regulators, people that were just interested in your research. It's fun. But the most important thing I learned here at UC was how to communicate science effectively. Some successes that I've witnessed just in the past couple years. One of them is, it's very local, it's close to home. MSD is in the planning and construction phase of building an anaerobic digester at our Little Miami wastewater treatment plant. This should reduce fugitive emissions from our treatment works. It should also produce biosolids that may be usable for land application. Also, it's going to generate biogas that we should be able to use on site to support our operations at that plant. And primarily, it's going to reduce odors too. So it'll make living around this plant a little bit more reasonable, a little bit more comfortable. Something else I noticed at the state level, ODNR is starting to plug abandoned wells. As you can see, from 2018 to 2023, the state has continuously plugged more wells every single year. Unfortunately, they're finding wells much faster than they're plugging them. For example, in 2023, they plugged almost 350 wells, but they found 450 new ones to plug. It's still good. We're making progress. One of the other successes I'm excited about is PFAS regulations. US EPA finally got us some drinking water PFAS regulations. I suspect that wastewater regulations are coming next. We could talk about that after the talk. Where I think things are going forward, we're going to be using technology more. For example, here I got kind of a cluster of things that may be a little hard to see, but MSD has a huge network of real-time data, real-time remote sensing. We have this in a wet weather SCADA system, and this system, the real boring one there, it talks to a map that is publicly available. So you guys could go on when it's raining next time and see what CSOs are discharging currently. I use these two things to dispatch a very skilled crew of samplers to go out and do the best work possible. So they're fantastic dudes. They're getting the work done, doing the Lord's work, if you will. And we're learning. So I think going forward, we're going to have more tools like this that are maybe a little bit more high tech. I'd like to see some water quality real-time data that could give us tools for surveillance, monitoring, and enforcement. But that pretty much wraps things up. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Our last, but certainly not least speaker is Jennifer Tomac. She's a current student at University of Cincinnati. Today was her last day of classes. And she's graduating this month with a BS in Environmental Studies. And she's completed 3 co-ops. Pretty cool. She's a member of Phi Beta Kappa. Wow, very impressive. And she's the current president of UC Students for Burnett Woods. And she's currently an environmental science intern with a national environmental engineering firm, where she's about to transition into a full-time staff environmental scientist in the compliance and permitting division. Congratulations on your job. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. So, as environmental students, we go into school with the idea of, I'm going to save the planet. I'm going to make a change. And then we do it. We finish school, we graduate, and then we have to do it. We have to go out and we have to save the planet. I think it's kind of terrifying and kind of preposterous to think that we know it all and that we can do it alone. I think that working in the environmental field is a team effort, and it's something we all have to do together to make the change that we want to see. My name is Jennifer Tomac, as Amy introduced me. I graduate next Friday with my Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Studies. Thank you. And I have a little bit of a niche interest in environmental regulations, permitting, and compliance. Very brief overview. Environmental regulations are rules and laws that kind of tell us how we can interact with the environment. So it's meant to prevent harm, kind of tell us where we can do better and make things better. We haven't always had them. Ever since the 60s, we've started to push out acts to create change where we're regulating the water that we're discharging into our water systems. We are regulating our air. We're regulating the oil that we're storing, so on and so forth. There's a lot of them. Companies interact with the environment in a very large capacity. So I think it's really important that we kind of associate that with a point of interest in improving the environmental world. From a company standpoint, it's a good thing to be in compliance and to be good at regulating all of your things. Well, first of all, it's going to save you money. It's going to do good. You're going to say, okay, these are risks that we've associated and we've acknowledged, and this is how we're going to prevent that. And then also it's kind of the idea where you're thinking about the companies that are bad for the environment. And as a company, you don't want to be on that list. You want to either be associated as good or just simply not in the conversation. So I was introduced to the world of regulations by co-op experiences. I started out working with hazardous waste and environmental safety. I was a part of a cleanup crew for a non-haz material spill. So I got to see like the PG side of what we are preventing with these regulations and, compliance. I then went into a co-op with the Metropolitan Sewer District. I worked in the laboratory doing preliminary water sampling tests. There I learned about water policies and our regulations on water. Then I went into working with an asphalt paving company. I was doing general regulations, permitting, auditing, inspections. It was really cool. I got to go into an active mine site, which I never thought I would do before. And now I'm currently an environmental science intern with an environmental engineering company where I am permitting industrial assets for different clients on the local, state, and federal scale. Why do I bring this up? All of my co-ops have been because of UC's emphasis on co-ops throughout our entire career at UC. We get to try tiny bits and pieces of the environmental world. There are so many different ways we can go and different opportunities we can take, and we're encouraged to be a part of the discussion. The School of Arts and Sciences left me with a very healthy level of curiosity about what was out there. I have so many amazing faculty members who took a diverse route to end up in the classrooms at UC, facilitating beautifully connected conversations about facets of the environmental conversation. We were encouraged to interact with our community, both with nonprofits, local organizations, in the parks, all of the above. We were engaged in activism, politics, policies, in like volunteering work, getting our hands dirty. Through this, we saw the many perspectives of what saving the planet looks like to these people. So after I graduate, I'll stay on the permitting and compliance side of the industry. I think that's my bread and butter. That's where I'm meant to be. But we all go to school to be equipped for our different roles, right? We go to learn and be good at it and to add an impact. Did I think that I would work in hazardous waste or at an asphalt paving company? Definitely not. I didn't think that, but I'm grateful for it. It gave me the idea that every industry, no matter how weird, obscure, or niche it is, has a place for us as environmental people to be involved in it. The environmental field is boisterous. We are so loud and we're kicking down doors we didn't even know we needed to open. There's avenues for everybody who wants to be engaged and be a part of that fight. We leave school, we enter the workforce, we are in the workforce or we're retired from the workforce with valuable knowledge and skills. We can't underestimate how we as individuals can be a part of the environmental fight. We have to explore the opportunities on the local level with our local organizations, like I've been grateful to be a part of. I believe that working in the environmental field in any capacity is to be a part of the countless hands that are needed to move forward and save the planet like we promised we would. Thank you.
Great. I don't know about all of you, but I'm feeling pretty inspired. Are you with me? Yeah. So when it comes to preparing our students here at UC to engage in scholarship and then careers that lead to discovery and action for a better world, one of the less seen parts of that process is working with students on the day-to-day challenges that can pop up and must be mitigated. In the School of Environment and Sustainability, our day-to-day challenge mitigator extraordinaire is Dr. Terry Jacobs. She is an assistant professor educator of conservation. In addition to being mitigator extraordinaire, Dr. Jacobs is also an assistant professor educator of conservation, biogeography, ecology, environmental science, remote sensing, and geographic information systems. Dr. Jacobs serves as the Director of Undergraduate Studies for SEAS and is a recipient of the Faculty Award for Transformational Experiential Learning. It is my joy to welcome Dr. Terry Jacobs to the stage to celebrate our SEAS students who are graduating this semester. Please help me welcome Dr. Terry Jacobs.
I have to say I have a little tear because of what Jen was going through. So sorry, my voice is a little shaky because I'm going to miss these guys. So I get attached. So I want to thank everyone here for giving me the opportunity, and Laura and Amy and other SEAS faculty, to celebrate our graduating environmental students from SEAS. They've taken up the charge to tackle our pressing problems, such as climate change or environmental justice. As you've heard from past and present students, today they follow their hearts and passions to make a difference in our local communities. We honor the impacts they have already made and look forward to learning about their continued efforts to improve our community and environmental well-being. Over the years, they have graced our Zoom rooms and classrooms and showcase their innovation in a way that I actually have hope for the future. I joke in class, they will save the world. In reality, they will save the world. The heaviness of this burden will not hinder them. They will uplift voices society has long silenced, not only the marginalized and disenfranchised peoples, but also the whispers of the wild and the sussing of the soil microbes. They know we are not protecting the environment. We are the environment protecting ourselves. Please welcome the newest agents of change in the Environmental Justice League. And they are, and hopefully I see you, and maybe raise your hand if you're here, Noelle Bradford. Yay! Jen Briner. Rufaro Bulasingalange. And I hope I didn't butcher that. We practice in class. Elle Ferris. Yay. Brian Hall, who I know is not here. Kelly Helton, who I saw right there. Keenan, he's in Spain right now, so we miss him here. Lydia Lepton's right there. Pip McCullers, I know he's not here. Aaron Reed. Maybe. Clinton Cincinnati. Don't know even here. Charlotte Schiff. Okay. Paige Snowball, Indira Thompson, Jennifer Tomac, Elizabeth Vass, Georgia Walters, and I know Jack Wigginton is not here either. So we can't wait to see how they pave the story, their lives for sustainable and joyful futures. We are proud of them and hope they stay connected. We have Instagram. If these students present could meet by the poster session, we'll have your cords and your parting gift. And then I know you already applauded for them, but I want to have everyone applaud for all of them for their academic achievements and cheering their heroics now and later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jacobs. So as you all might imagine, an event like this, it takes months of planning and teams of people dedicated to its success. And there's way too many people here for me to thank right now, but I do have to acknowledge a few people. Mr. Mark Osborne, who's the Program Director of Alumni Engagement for the College of Arts and Sciences, as well as Mr. William Judd, who's President of the College of Arts and Sciences Alumni Board. Have to thank them for their support. Mark, William and I have been working together for months on this in hopes that it would go off without a hitch. And I believe it did, except for the button for Jacob. So we're okay. Yep. So you'll understand my surprise after all of these, preparations when just a couple days ago, I found out I was going to get to introduce the next and final speaker for this portion of EJAS. Just a little nervous. It is my honor and privilege to introduce to you my boss's boss, the Dean of the UC College of Arts and Sciences, Dr. James Mack. In addition to leading our college, Dean Mack is a professor of chemistry with dozens of publications, book chapters, presentations, and more. In concert with the theme of this event, Dean Mack has been interested in the development of environmentally benign organic reactions and the synthesis of novel organic materials. His accomplishments are too many to capture here and now, but the teams of people that I mentioned earlier who are responsible for making this event possible are able to do what they do with excellence because of the great leadership that supports them. And it is my honor to introduce you to that great leadership, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at UC, Dr. James Mack.
You, Professor Hyland, but now I'm on the stage. I didn't know that was I signed up to do. I really want to say thank you to all of the speakers and all of our alums that are doing fantastic work out there. They gave me 2 minutes, and anyone who knows me, this is very difficult doing 2 minutes, but then they told me I was only going to be on to 4:32. So technically I have like 10 minutes or something like that. I promise you I won't do another tech talk, but I do want to thank Bob, William, and Mark for putting on such a wonderful play. Also, Terry, Amy, and Laura, who is leading a fantastic group and new department, by the way, which is what I really wanted to emphasize. Environmental studies has been around the College of Arts and Sciences for a long period of time. Before I became dean, I was divisional dean of natural sciences, and I had an opportunity to work with a fantastic group of faculty across divisions to make environmental studies a department that had not only undergraduates, faculty, and then moving towards graduates, students. And we got an amazing leader, Laura Zanotti, who came from Purdue. Yes, definitely. Who's already leading in ways and sending emails about all the wonderful things that our students and our alums are doing. So I really appreciate all of it. Remember what I told you, though, about that. What I told her was, if you set the bar way up here when you first start, there's, my expectation is just going to increase from there. So pump your brakes a little bit. So Bob told you I'm very passionate about sustainability. I've been in this field for about 20 or so years in the area of green chemistry, and I've got a team of students that are working to make the world a better place. And so To the graduates, the message that I would have, you are going to go change the world. And I was one of those bright-eyed, bushy-tailed individuals too. And as I'm slowing down, what I would say if I had to go back to my old self, you don't have to do it alone. So it's not you changing the world, we change the world. Be the spark for somebody else to do things. Be the catalyst that's then going to be the next thing that somebody else does, because it is going to take all of us to do what we need to do to make the changes we need to make. And it's difficult. There's a lot of people who don't understand. Jake talked about legislatures, and from their standpoint, I use my dad as an example oftentimes. He's been around for a long period of years, and we talk about a 50-year problem. He doesn't have a whole lot of interest in a 50-year-old problem. He's 82, 3 right now. He's probably not going to make it to 123. But he does care about his grandkids' future. He cares about his great-grandkids' future, and that's the kind of impacts. Those are the kind of stories we need to share. I see my wife looking at me in a little way. She's wrap it up a bit. So with that, I'll say, please join us in TUC at the Atrium upstairs. There's a poster session where we can hear more. Network reception, definitely mingle around. I'll be up there for a little bit too. And I definitely want to thank all the work that everyone's doing in this area. And so please join me thanking all of the speakers and all the people who put it together. And then I'll see you upstairs.
That's our cue. The dean told us to go upstairs. It's like, and those of you joining us on Zoom, we're going to experiment and try and bring you along with us to the poster session. So hang tight and we'll be with you in a minute. So welcome everyone who's joining us on Zoom. Thank you so much for being with us. This is a university, and so this is we do lots of experimenting at universities, and this is definitely an experiment. So right now we're walking through UC on our way to the poster session. There's Jen. She was one of our speakers. You all met her. And what we're going to try and do is go upstairs to the poster session and zoom you in so you can see what the students who have been doing over the past semester. And if it works, you'll enjoy it. And if it doesn't, you can just drop off. But we're glad you're here with us. Give us a minute to get up to the atrium. Hi, Donna. How are you? Oh, cold. I know it got cold.
No, we didn't bring.
Oh. Oh. So welcome everyone on Zoom to the TUC Atrium, the Tangeman University Center Atrium on the UC campus. We have many guests here today from city and elsewhere. Take you into, hello, would you all like to present your poster to those joining us on Zoom? It is. Would you like to talk to yourself? Would you like to talk to our Zoom guests about your project?
Yeah. Do you want me to hold this microphone?
Talk into the microphone.
I'm in space. Okay. So our poster was a campaign we did for a class project. We specifically focused on water quality and how that has an impact on climate change. So we started off doing kind of educational pieces through social media, talking about water conservation, the state of water quality in Ohio, and just the struggles we face just with our water quality and how climate change can impact that. Then we moved on to like actually talking to students on campus. We made signs. We did a petition for Crow, which would give rights to the Ohio the Ohio River as a watershed. And then also we collected donations. We raised over $150, which we're going to donate to the Mill Creek Alliance to help their efforts with water conservation. So that's all I got. Yeah. Anything?
Sounds like a super fun project. And if any of you are interested in donating to one of their community partners, it was the Mill Creek Alliance. Now, I don't know if you'd be able to scan that QR code on Zoom, but you can always check out the Mill Creek Alliance on the World Wide Web, who is a great partner to the students. And the students involved in this project were Kyle Boland, Laura Fitzpatrick, Kelly Helton, and Lydia Lupton. Thank you all. Yeah. Moving over here to our next poster. Hello, everyone. Would you all care to share your poster with the participants joining us on Zoom?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, hello. My name is Avery. My research group, we researched the community perception of natural gas street lamps in the greater Cincinnati metro area. I don't know what to say. We used a survey. The snowball sample. Would somebody else like to take over?
What did you find in the survey, the community perceptions through the survey?
People like the gas lamps.
People like the gas lamps. Did they see them as a source of pollution?
Not really. Nope.
It looks like 72% of survey respondents did not consider the gas lights to be a source of pollution. So do you have any takeaways or conclusions or next steps that you would recommend based upon your work?
Education is very important. Educating the public.
Awesome. Good work. Moving right along. Elle, would you like to present your poster to the folks who are joining us on Zoom?
I'd be happy to. I'll hold this. All right. I spent my summer as an intern, a field research intern at the Thomas More University Biology Field Station. And I mainly focused on the question of if sediment composition had an effect on the macroinvertebrate communities living in local stream ecosystems. If you don't know, macroinvertebrates are basically little water bugs that you can still see with the naked eye. What I found was that in streams that had a higher percentage of fine sediment particles, that stream, or those streams in particular, were more polluted and had less of a ratio of your pollution sensitive species, which are the ones that tell you your ecosystem is healthy. So if you're not aware, fine sediment particles are one of the #1 polluters in the Ohio River and surrounding stream ecosystems. And in those streams with the higher fine sediments, I found higher ratios of crawdads in pollution tolerant species as opposed to the ones that had more gravel and sand particles, which are coarse sediment particles. We found more mayflies and caddisflies, which are pollution intolerant species and indicate a healthy ecosystem. So, yeah.
Thank you, Elle. And if our guests scan that QR code, where would that take them?
That would take them to all of my sources and related literature.
All of the peer-reviewed literature that she used to background her project. Great. Thank you, Elle.
Thank you.
Hey, would you like to present your poster to those joining us on Zoom?
Hi guys, so I'm Adriana Arias. I am the social media coordinator for UC Students for Burnett Woods. Burnett Woods is across the street from UC, bordering Ludlow and MLK. So these are the awesome things that we've done throughout the years. So we've done trash pickups, protests against the dog park. This dates back to even when they were protesting other things in the park. And recently we were just granted a Seeds of Change grant to make environmental educational videos for the public and for students around UC and at like Hughes High School and stuff like that. And those are premiering tomorrow. So pretty awesome. You guys can check out our YouTube page and look at those. And we'll also have some stuff posted on Instagram. And yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Appreciate it. There's about 2 more posters. So if this is coming through, I'll keep going. Hello. Would you care to present your poster to the participants joining on Zoom?
This is so exciting. Okay. So this is a poster we did a project with Middletown, Ohio. They do have a steel plant up there. So we were analyzing, it's a 2-part project. On the other side of this board, we have the like scientific soil analysis, but this is for the more human aspects of it. So we did interviews with some residents up there and we had like surveys and things to kind of get their perspective of any risks or issues that this steel plant faces. Right over on this little chart, you have a breakdown of kind of like, these are quotes from residents throughout our interviews and surveys. And then they've kind of been assigned a code and a theme. So like this one, for example, they're talking about, sulfur, cancer, melanoma, more cancer. Those are all diseases and those kind of indicate hidden risks associated with this steel plant. It is a distribution of the codes. So it's a breakdown of each one of these codes, how often they show up. So you can kind of easily see the biggest concerns for the community.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Marilyn. I'll be right back. Uh-oh, here comes Zoom. Hey, everyone. How are you? Tierney, would you care to present your poster to the folks that are joining us on Zoom? Or Francine? Yeah, at that table. Hey, Francine, would you like to present your poster to those joining us on Zoom? Okay. What did you do?
Okay, so we kind of had a dual project. Can everyone hear me? I don't know if there's like a.
You're good.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay.
Qualitative.
Yeah, I was gonna mention, yeah, we have the qualitative side and the quantitative side. So what we did was, and I'm assuming we already know, Middletown, Ohio, we talked to residents, we took soil samples, and we specifically measured for lead and arsenic at 3 different sites. So we had 3 samples at 3 sites, and we did some XRF analysis, which is X-ray fluorescence, which will release like when the electrons are excited in the atoms, when they go back down, it releases a certain spectra, which allows us to see the concentration of elements in our samples. And what we found was we compared it to the concentrations set by here, yeah. the arsenic concentration was set by the Ohio Department of Health, and the lead concentration was set by the Ohio EPA. And it was specific to Ohio because Ohio is known to have higher arsenic concentrations in the soil. But we still found that at this specific area, which is near Cleveland Cliffs, but they're not known to be the polluters, but that was why we chose that site. And we found that almost all of our samples had elevated levels of arsenic, and one sample that is the closest to that potential polluter, had elevated levels of lead as well. So we can't know anything for sure just because this was handheld XRF, which isn't always the most precise, but it does definitely show that we need to do more research in the area because still a little concerning levels, but yeah.
Thank you so much.
I hope that was
great.
I'm not a presenter.
We have one more poster to bring to you. The presenter looks a little busy at the moment, but we'll see. Afshan is a graduate student in the Department of Anthropology. She did a project on wedding consumption and sustainability, generational perceptions of excess and waste in Kashmiri weddings. It was an ethnographic study. And once she's done talking to her audience right now, I'll see if she wants to present to all of you here on Zoom, and then we will sign off. And thank you so much for coming to 2024 EJAS. Would you be willing to present to the people who are joining on Zoom?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, but I didn't see anywhere. Hi, everyone. My name is Ruqayya Afshan. I'm from Anthropology Department. And this symposium was really great. We had really great speakers. And okay, so I'm from Anthropology Department. I'm doing my master's. And this summer, I was in India. And there is a small geographically isolated place called Kashmir. I'm from that place. So from where this idea of research came was I got married last year and I told my husband, let's do one thing, let's have a simple wedding. And by simple, I don't mean let's limit the number of guests. Let's limit the way we consume. So our Indian culture of consumption is huge. So it was like, oh yeah, absolutely, why not? So when I reached there as a bride, I see 500 guests waiting for me, welcoming me. Yeah, very warming. But the thing is, we had lots of food, lots of things, lot of utility goods, not utility, just goods. And I was like, this was not, you had promised me something. And he told me, look, I made my parents understand that we can have a simple wedding where the consumption is not that huge, but I could not make them understand. I could not make them understand the gravity of the situation right now. From there came the idea of to know the generational perceptions of our parents and us who are getting married, how they see this waste, how they see the consumption, how they see the ritual consumption. And the conclusion of the whole thing was weddings definitely are the site. So I conducted the field work. I attended 5 weddings. I have been there as a participant. I stayed for 3 days at every wedding because it's a 3-day phenomena, 3-day events. And I interviewed 30 people, bride, groom, parents, their immediate relatives, and the guests present there. So yes, I stayed there for 2.5 months. And
in two places, Srinagar and Budgam. So Srinagar is a city, and Budgam is a, you can see it's an outskirts area. It's a rural place. You have many villages there. So I attended city weddings, I attended the rural weddings, and at the end I realized, so in cities, you have these facilities, these services that municipality van will come, pick all your trash, and the urban neighborhood people, they don't see anything that they have wasted. So they don't never get bothered. But in rural villages, what happens? Such services does not exist. So people have to deal with the waste themselves. So what they do, they at the first hand, they just try to limit what they have to consume. So you can see here, these are, I'm not sure if it's visible. These are lambs being slaughtered, lamb being cooked. And you can see this is just for one wedding, one function, one lunch, and cooked on the firewood. Huge amount of firewood is used, and this served, the food is served, and this is just beginning of the feast. And this feast is called Wazwan. It's called Wazwan in Kashmir. And this Wazwan, and then you are served with these dry fruit boxes. And then you can see the influx of the dried fruit boxes in the local markets. And you can see the disposables, lot of disposables. And you can see the interviews. People are like, so what happened? What is happening? The Vazwan has become huge. How huge? So initially they used to serve just 7 cuisines and all meat and chicken, but now they have increased to 16. So it's a clear sight and phenomenon of overconsumption. And people are not able to eat it. They just pack it and take home. And sometimes it's just wasted. Second thing, these boxes. So decades ago, there was no concept of the boxes, but now it is. Plus, they are just waste of money, one-time use, and just throw it away. And you have to buy such 400 boxes for one wedding. Use it for half an hour and throw it away. So, again, the municipality van will come, pick this stuff up, and people don't see any trash. They don't see any waste. But it exists. As I said, all this trash goes to some poor neighborhood, and it creates an inequality, that injustice, that environmental injustice. So I see it like that way. And you can see these, okay, there are some funny interviews, and a young generation one, so she's a bride, and she's like, okay, what are these boxes? What is inside these boxes? Just peanuts and almonds. These luxury boxes that we present to, they are required to welcome the guests. But what are these boxes? Nothing, just peanuts and almonds. So the bride was really angry. She wanted her parents to not to buy these boxes, but yeah, they had to. And another one was like, oh, and you know what? People won't reuse these boxes. Why? Because people will never use these boxes at home or for their own functions. Why? Because now these boxes are considered cheap. Now you saw this box, now this is cheap. You cannot use it. And if you use it, it will bring you shame. It's an embarrassment. So this is how we perpetuate the tradition, these modern traditions of overconsumption. Lastly, I realized from my field work that definitely weddings are the site of overconsumption, but it's actually everyday phenomena as well in India. So every household is a site of waste creation. And it's an everyday thing. You're consuming a lot every day, but you're able to see it on a larger scale on a wedding. So there is this environmental neglect in our society, but yeah, then there are people who are rejecting also. So there is a village in entire Kashmir. So this village, heads of this village have come with the 9 rules adopted by 1,300 households. And what they have done, they have done that they will limit this Vazwan to just 5 dishes. So out of the 14, there will be just 5. And they will ban all the disposable. This is gone. And they will replace the dry fruit boxes with everyday household crockery. So this is also gone. So yeah. So this is the community, how community brings justice to themselves. So they are like, yeah, this is the stuff we can do. And there are more nuances to it. Like I have a bigger picture of my thesis. This is a smaller picture. But yes, these issues are serious. We need to think of these rituals
particularly in communities where weddings, such events are really important. But due to the capitalism and opening of these markets, these local markets to the international ones, the influx of goods at cheaper prices, these are at cheap prices. So what happens? People feel tempted. So instead of buying 5, let me buy 10 because I can. But what about the larger thing? What will happen to tomorrow? What about our sustainability values? So our younger generation are forced to compromise their sustainability values just because our elder generation recently got exposed to these international markets. So that's my research. Thank you so much.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Afshan. And thank you again to all of you who joined 24 EJAS on Zoom. We are going to sign off, but you know how to get a hold of us. We appreciate you very much, and we hope to see you again next year. Take care.